Thank you, as always, for joining us and spending your valuable time as we make our way through the highways and byways of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. Now, before we start, I just want to remind you of the services that are upcoming for this Sunday. We have our 8 o'clock Rite 1 and our 10 o'clock Rite 2. And good news is that the organist Josh will be able to play this weekend because he has had no symptoms and is negative for COVID-19. So thank you so much for the prayers, and I'm really looking forward to, with me yapping on in my undulcet tones. What's the opposite of dulcet? Noise?
Cacophonous.
Cacophonous tones, yes. So don't forget to say hi as you come on so we can say hi back to you and we know who's watching. So yes, 8 o'clock is a service that has plenty of space. So if you want to turn up, you don't need to ask me. So please do. Remember, it starts at 8 and it's a Rite 1 said service. The 10 o'clock Rite 2 is something that I do need to know about if you're going to attend, because in theory we're kind of near the limit of numbers as to those who said they would attend. So just give me a call and I'll let you know whether or not it's good. As always, you have to follow all the protocols of mask wearing, sanitizing your hands, social distancing, and that continues throughout the service. And also, if you would like to receive communion but cannot make it to the services, we still do have our drive-through communion, which takes place from 11 a.m. till 11:30 a.m. And I think it's working a lot more smoothly now, isn't it?
Yeah.
Reducing it from an hour to half an hour has really it's made it more brisk. The traffic is
More.
stable. So who's on? Hello, Bill and Kit and Vern and Karen. It's good to see you all. And yes, it is good news about Josh. All right.
So, excuse me, last week we looked at what we call the Lord's Prayer. Within the context of Matthew's Gospel, the Lord's Prayer acts like the center of the Sermon on the Mount, and it informs every part of Matthew's Gospel. Starting off by reminding us of the communal nature of belief. The Lord's Prayer takes us through two realities of God being in heaven and us humans being on earth, beginning with the recognition that it is only when God's flourishing life exists among us that we will experience God as we are really meant to experience. And if you remember, the Lord's Prayer is a plural. We give us this day our daily bread, our Father in heaven. It's not my or my own little slice of heaven, my daily bread.
Me eat my small corner and you in yours, or something like that. It's a kid's song, I think. Maybe it's just English. I don't know. Maybe I just completely got it wrong. Both are possible.
Jesus uses what the theologians call realized eschatology. What that means is that we are experiencing the end times, but it hasn't come to a complete conclusion. And he uses that now, not now, in the Lord's Prayer as we seek to make real in our own lives God's kingdom. And we move further into realizing that everything we have comes from God. God, give us this day our daily bread. The prayer then moves on to what at first may seem a transactional view of God's mercy, in that our ability to be forgiven is based on our willingness to forgive.
This makes more sense if we actually use the words debt and debtor, because the world of Jesus was one of the kind of honor, shame, Mediterranean view of things, with debt being owed to one another being an absolute big deal. Hello, Paula. Oh, by the way, the T-shirt was provided by James Rubottom, so thank you very much for that. I appreciate the way I can sort of
The advertisement.
yeah for the Episcopal Church
Yes.
and the Anglican Communion in general, the Via Media.
The middle way.
Yes, that's what we're doing here.
Oh, yes.
We have to work on our conviction a bit more. Yes, so yeah, the words debt and debtor makes much more sense here because of the world in which Jesus lived, where they understood debt being a big deal. As was mentioned at least a couple of weeks ago, mercy is also a major theme within the Gospel of Matthew, both throughout the whole book, but in particular within the sermon. And so, with mercy being a major characteristic, and this being to do with the virtuous lives of Jesus' disciples, we find here stated in stark terms that you either forgive others when they sin against you, or you cannot expect God to forgive you for your offenses against him. And Jesus finally teaches us that if we are to follow God, we are going to be walking in a narrow way, one that leads us not into so it leads us into not wanting to follow God. Those are the
That was a convoluted
it
negative
was, wasn't it?
sentence.
Yes. Well, we say we want to follow God, but then we kind of drift off. It's
Yeah.
just who we are as people. And so we don't want God to test us because we think that's really terrible. And we blame everything else on the devil.
Yeah, I mean, it's the oldest story in the book.
Yeah.
Chapter 2 of Genesis.
Eve blamed Adam.
No.
Yeah. Eve, well, all right.
God comes to
Tell the
Eden
story. Preach it.
and asks Eve what happened, and she said, "The devil made me do it."
Oh, I say yes.
And so he goes to Adam, and why did you eat? Well, the woman you gave me tempted me, and I ate the apple. And then God goes to the serpent, and it's interesting. He asks questions of Adam and Eve, but he doesn't ask a question of the serpent. He just says, "You are now condemned to crawl on your belly."
That's why the concise version is Adam blamed Eve, Eve blamed the serpent, and the serpent didn't have a leg to stand on. You never heard that?
I have. I just had never thought of it.
All right, so let's see if I can put this sentence that I wrote so weirdly
Back together.
into right. Jesus is teaching us that to follow God isn't a broad way, it's a narrow way. And it's one that leads us into making choices. And the choices are a dual. There's the one where we are faithful to God and we do that. Then there's the one where our humanity, our fallenness gets out in the way and we do what we want. One we would want to say is that a time of trial. But God is at the other end of whatever it is we're doing. And going through this thing with the expectation that we find God at the end of it is fortifying. It's like the silver and the gold being refined 7 times. It becomes more pure as we go through that process. The other way is just leads us away from God, even though it may be something that we want to do. Now, all this seems to be rather somber and negative, but it turns out actually to be an emphatic note required for the end of the Lord's Prayer. It's something that we really need to take to heart as we move towards this flourishing life with God.
I've been thinking about the tone of the Sermon on the Mount and how, at least for me, I used to read it in in kind of a very negative way. I mean, the whole approach was, do not be like the hypocrites. Very, very down, and you shouldn't be doing that. And then Jesus offers the alternative. But lately I've been thinking about them in terms of Jesus being a little bit with a smile on his face. and saying, don't be like the hypocrites, do it this way, as giving an alternative, but in a casting it kind of in a positive tone. I don't know if that helps anyone, but it made a difference to me when I was reading. The general words at the end of the Lord's Prayer help us make sense of God's forgiveness, resting on our forgiveness in the best way. That we recognize the consistency of God, and that because of this, the people of God in Christ must have a righteousness that is greater than mere external obedience and outward appearance. This not only ties into the Beatitudes, but also into the Sermon on the Mount we've covered so far. And surprisingly, it continues when we move on into the text. So let's do that. Now let's read, let's continue our journey reading through the Sermon on the Mount, beginning with verses immediately after the Lord's Prayer, verses 16 through 18 of chapter 6. And whenever you fast, do not look dismal, like the hypocrites, for they disfigure their faces so as to show others that they are fasting. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward. But when you fast, put oil on your face and wash your face, so that your fasting may be seen not by others, but by your Father who is in secret. And your Father who sees in secret will reward you.
Hello, Anne. So this is the third and final example of true piety that meets Jesus' standard for the greater heart-level righteousness that he demands of us. The structure here is very similar to what we've read before the Lord's Prayer. You've got to imagine the Lord's Prayer as an excursion, although it's still a whole part and a meaningful center of everything that's been said. It's also a kind of an excursion. So he's kind of come back now to where he left off before the Lord's Prayer. These two verses, is it 2 or 3 verses? I can't remember. I can never count.
16, 17, 18.
3 verses. Oh, right. Believe it or not, I used to be pretty good at math. Can't even add 3 now. No, anyway, these verses add to the whole argument of chapter 6, verses 1 through 21. So there's a whole heap of verses there. And they use the same formula as on almsgiving and on prayer that we heard before. Yet, these 3 verses use slightly different characteristics, and there are stylistic differences to let us know that this will be the last example given.
I think it's important to remember that the Gospels are not an attempt to give us a historical view of who Jesus is, but to take his life and to make meaning out of it. And each gospel is directed toward a particular community. And I have just been marveling at the way in which Matthew's author uses literary style, and was an incredible craftsperson. Crafted this to really have zinger after zinger after zinger,
but also within the context of what they would understand.
Yes, yeah. Sorry, I just had to jump in there for a minute.
Was that a little rabbit hole?
Well, I think it could be. I do see Alice running down.
I did desperately want to say, oh, look at your textual criticism coming through by saying the author of Matthew rather than just saying Matthew.
Excuse me, we're having very nice weather today.
See what you miss?
But of course, he's wrong. Go right ahead. I'll stay out of the way now.
Why? Is it me? Oh, yeah, it is, isn't it? So, well, let's look at the content now. Now we've been down a bit of a rabbit hole,
Yes.
which was completely unnecessary and wrong as well. A twofer. Along with giving to the poor and praying, intentionally fasting, which is what these verses are talking about, was actually common practice among the Jews in the ancient world. The fasts, believe it or not, it wasn't an individual thing, which we kind of associate fasting with just one person doing it now. But there could be examples of communal fasting that take place.
And in Jewish tradition, fasting occurred on Tuesday and Thursday. That's why we have Wednesday and Friday.
It's when they were serving shellfish.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, especially in the first century, it seems many pious Jews fasted especially for the giving of rain during the drought season, which was something essential, obviously. They were an agrarian society, so they needed rain to make sure the crops grew. Such men, and I'm afraid it was always men, were held in high esteem and held with great respect because of their fasting intercessions. I tried to think of modern examples, and I just couldn't think of any. You have to go to different religions, like Hinduism, where you get some of the proponents of Hinduism who are supposed to be in touch with a particular god of something that you go to, and you give them some money, and then they will pray and whatever. But I can't think of anything closer to that. So what they did was praised by others.
Now, Jesus is not condemning or diminishing the practice of fasting, but is highlighting that such obvious outward-looking look at me examples are supposed to be God-directed rather than look at me directed, and can easily be perverted into pride and badges of honor. And so to Jesus, this is hypocrisy. It's not something where those who are proclaiming fasting are not actually fasting. They're doing it, but they're doing it to gain the admiration and praise of someone else besides God. Jesus is upholding the importance of true piety, things that are done with the right heart, greater righteousness, kingdom-oriented real-life practices and habits that inculcate humility, faith, and love. Jesus recognizes just how powerful a drug of praise from others can be. And in the religious realm, we can too easily become performers of good deeds, gaining our reward from the praise of others, rather than having a true heart motivation towards God and our piety.
When you think about the praise of others, social media is, just look, unless you've got X billion friends, a lot of youngsters think they're nothing unless their latest posting. And this is scientifically verified now in psychological studies and all kinds of studies, that people will post something, and if they don't get any likes, they get physically depressed, mentally depressed. Yeah. Really, it's not just, oh, I feel sad. They really do. Their body switches off all the drugs that produces everything for depression. And if they get likes, they get the
hit of dopamine.
Yeah, all the happy things. And then if they don't get the number of likes they think something should get, that's really, really awful to think about, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's a kind of a strange dilemma, because when we're trying to teach children, when they do something good, one of the things that parents do is they praise the child. Mm-hmm. And there is a positive aspect of that kind of praise, but then it can become a consuming hunger. And when it becomes that kind of hunger that you need the praise of others, and so you start doing things to garner that praise, that's when it becomes a problem.
And then there's the situation when you make your child do things so you feel good.
Yeah.
Oh, humans, we're so messed up.
We are so good at it.
Yeah. So that's having dealt with those 3 verses.
Yeah.
We're now going to look at the final 3 verses, well, the 3 verses for today, anyway, 19 through 21. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust consume, and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust consumes, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And Bill says rabbit hole. Is that rabbit hole number 2?
It must be.
Yeah, it's 1 all now, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's see. Yeah. Let's try and stick to, no. Right. So 19 through 21. Do not store up for yourselves. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be
That's
also.
store up, not store up.
Store.
Up.
I was telling people on Tuesday that every time it comes to pronouncing certain words, I stall now because of you. You're turning me into a nervous wreck, Father.
I'm so sorry. What do you mean turning into?
Yeah. See, if this could be edited, I'd ask you to say that again, but with meaning.
And a little less sarcasm?
Yes.
Just a teeny weeny bit less sarcasm.
Anyway, yes. So now we come to this conclusion of this really long part of the greater righteousness. Now, for many people, including Bible commentators, these 3 verses, do not store up, don't store treasures and stuff like that, are often disconnected from all the previous verses, as if they don't actually fit in with what's gone before. I mean, I've seen this where it becomes almost a freestanding gospel reading in its own right.
Mm-hmm. I think for commentators, if you miss a fundamental aspect of Sermon on the Mount, a lot of things don't make sense, and that aspect is true inward disposition of piety. And if you don't catch that as being the governing factor throughout the Sermon on the Mount, you'll make mistakes like, oh, well, what does this have to do with anything?
Yeah, the other thing is not seeing the whole thing as a continuum.
Yeah.
That it's a whole piece. I mean, we're so used to memes now, aren't we? And we kind of memify Father Bill. Although you don't sound very sorry. He isn't Father Bill. I mean, look at him.
Excuse me.
Talking about whole body. His whole body says, I'm laughing. So, yes.
Some dignos.
Yeah, right. So, yes, we cannot memify this and just turn it into a bunch of little epithets. We're not doing either the gospel, especially we're not doing Jesus any favors when we do that. One of the reasons why we should hold these 3 verses together with the previous 3 verses and the whole thing is because there's some wordplay going on between verses 16 and 18 and 19 and 21. And this wordplay does not show up in most of our English translations. In fact, I spent some good time on BibleGate.com just
reading,
going with I set it up for these verses from 16 to 21, and I just kept choosing different translations, different variations of the Bible, and not one of them really showed this link. And the words involved, which create this link, this wordplay, are the words that we translated as disfigured in verse 16 and as consume or consumes in verses 19 and 20. And they all use the same New Testament Greek word that should be translated as disfigured.
So this second set of verses would more accurately be read as, do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust disfigure, and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust disfigures, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. There's a rare Greek word, or at least it's not common in the New Testament. that refers both to the faces of the hypocrites when they're fasting, disfigured, and to what happens to all earthly treasure in the end, because earthly things will not be around forever, to be destroyed or caused to vanish. This word, which is rare in Matthew's gospel, is used twice in such close proximity to each other that it's not an accident, but is used as wordplay to link each of these parts together.
Now, there's another hint which suggests that these links all verse together. These verses all link together. And that's these last two verses form a perfect symmetry of the whole argument of the chapter 6, verses 1 through 21. And this argument is that greater righteousness is a matter of the heart or of the inner person. And verse 21 sums it up like this: "For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." Now, something's shifted here. And sometimes, because we're just plodding through the text, we don't pay attention to the details. But what we've heard before throughout the previous verses is all to do with rewards. Your rewards can either be heavenly or earthly, praise that comes from God or praise of others. And the choice between the two is a matter of where your heart is aligned.
We need to remember that the Jewish concept of heart is vastly different from what we think of as today. Today we think of heart as being the center of emotion and affection and so on. But for the ancient Jews, the heart was more than emotions or affections. It was regarded as being the very essence or nature of a person. So at its softest, we could claim that this last verse is saying, what you value is what you love. But in fact, the last verse is saying much, much more. It is saying what you value is who you are and as a person. Think about that again. What you value is who you really are as a person. Thus, the person who values the praise of others more than the praise of God is a true hypocrite, the opposite of what a real disciple would be. There are several key words and concepts within these verses that reflect and evoke the virtue wisdom tradition. The first is the use of the word reward. And yes, that word has appeared before. In fact, it has appeared and will reappear several times. This tells us that it is an important word. Throughout verses 1 through 21, reward from the Father appears as a positive notion. We also need to read they have their reward in full as a negative notion. But at the heightened conclusion of this section, the term reward, misthos, changes.
Say that again.
Misthos.
Yes.
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 Yes. Changes to the closely related word thesaurus, where we get the word
Thesaurus.
thesaurus. Thesaurus.
A treasury.
A treasury of words. And that's what it means, treasure.
So, just to clarify that, the word is shifted from reward to treasure.
And you might think, well, what's the significance? It's that Jesus is offering us staggering and sure reward that are actually treasures from God himself. Not the praise of others, but the unfolding of our being into God.
I love that. The unfolding of our being into God.
I've been reading Irenaeus again.
Oh, I thought it was all yours.
No.
Oh, well. Now here we need to recall what the goal of all of this is. What seems like years ago now, we discussed the Greco-Roman philosophies, and their end goal was happiness and virtue and truth. But within Jesus, how he saw things, it was this wisdom flourishing. Remember the Beatitudes and wisdom, and the wisdom literature of the Old Testament or the Hebrew Scriptures is all tied up in what Jesus is offering his disciples as, I suppose you could call it a rule of life, could you? It's more
Yeah.
than that. It's a way of being. A way of being.
But I think a real rule of life is
a way of being.
a way of being.
Yeah. Now, one of the reasons why we, as 21st century people, can so easily misread and so miss out what Jesus is saying here is because our prevailing form of thought is now so coloured by many other different philosophical positions. The first one being that we are post-Enlightenment people. Now, it shouldn't actually go, I shouldn't need to say that, but what does it actually mean?
This is going to be the cliff notes for European philosophy for a couple of centuries. We're getting into the
from the 16th and 17th centuries anyway.
But it's not. It's just kind of like an overview. It's not.
It's not deep. It's not deep at all. You know, I'm reading this, so it can't be deep. Now, the scientific revolutions within the 16th and 17th century led to a great cultural movement we now call the Enlightenment. I'm sure you all know that. Previous part of this is that the previously accepted religious doctrines became challenged increasingly as faith in God, faith in Scripture, and faith in organized religion began to decline, but only amongst what they call the intelligentsia, that is, the educated elite. Do you say elite or elite?
elite.
Right. And we have to remember that a lot of the science that was being proposed, propounded, discovered, was also being done by religious people of different faiths, different religions, and monks, priests. There was a lot going on in this period. It's huge. Now, as Nietzsche infamously described this shift away from organized religion, he put it this way: God is dead and we have killed him. It was a bit more involved than that, but it's basically, what do we build on now?
I remember it was sometime in the late '60s that Time magazine, the front cover was half of that quote, "God is dead."
Yeah, that's always the problem. That's the only.
It doesn't continue.
Most people, that's the only part they know. God is dead.
Yeah, and I was just so scandalized by that. I couldn't read the.
What he said was actually, if you've actually, I wish I could remember the work, was it was quite true in that the kind of foundational, not a document, outlook of life had been God. God was the buck stops here.
Yeah.
So morality was based on God providing that moral and ethical foundation. If you kick God out, where do you start? There's nothing that you can point to and say all our ethics, all our morals comes from this one point and pours out from this. So philosophers and social theorists then tried to put together an ethic that didn't require God, or at least could provide some social cohesion within a non-theistic framework. And out of all the various possibilities, I've chosen three prominent ones, two of them because they were English. and so I'd read a bit about them. And the other one, well, is German. But
Yes.
that's all right. You got a German background.
Yeah.
So you're okay.
Well,
Now
the
and
first.
again.
Excuse me. Okay, now and again. Yes. The first is the social contract theory. And this answer to the Enlightenment problem of ethics without God was pioneered by the English philosopher Thomas Hobbes, late 1500s, early 1600s. He argued that morality was essentially just a set of rules that human beings agreed on among themselves in order to make living with one another possible. He suggested that if we didn't have these rules, many of which took the form of laws enforced by the government, life would be absolutely horrific for everyone.
So then, as a kind of an attempt to counterbalance the obvious problems with that, because if you say, right, you've got to follow this law, the question I would ask is, why?
Why?
Well, because this
Because I
nothing,
say so.
yeah, right.
It's like the parent
I
and the
kill
kid.
you with 1,000 killings, and this everything becomes just whatever you want it to be.
Yeah.
So utilitarianism came into being. It was pioneered by a thinker called David Hume and another one called Jeremy Bentham. He's the guy whose body is in one of the science museums in London. He's dead. He was born in 1748, but his body has been embalmed. And I think he's sitting on a chair or something, and you can go through the entranceway and you'll see him.
Can you push a button in a recording?
Animatronics.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
a recording comes out.
I think that's a bit of a rabbit hole as well. Anyway, yes, utilitarianism. You all know what this is, even if you don't know the name. It's the pleasure and happiness have an intrinsic value, and that what we all want are the ultimate goals that all our actions aim towards. If something is good, it promotes happiness, and if it's bad, it promotes suffering or sadness. So our basic duty in life is to try and do things that add to the amount of happiness and or reduce the amount of misery in the world.
And now we go to the German guy, Immanuel Kant. Immanuel Kant was, he had absolutely no truck with utilitarianism.
He did not like it at all.
He did not like it. He believed that placing the emphasis on happiness completely misunderstood the true nature of morality. In his view, the basis of our sense of what is good or bad, right or wrong, is our awareness that human beings are free, rational agents who should be given the respect appropriate to such beings. But what exactly does that mean? What does it entail?
Now, in Kant's view, the basic problem with utilitarianism is that it judges actions by their consequences. If your action makes people happy, thumbs up. If it doesn't, thumbs down. But is this actually contrary to what we might call common sense, at least moral common sense? Well, let's have an example. Who's the better person here? The millionaire who gives $1,000 to charity in order to score points with his Twitter following? Or the minimum wage worker who donates a day's pay to a charity because she thinks it's her duty to help the needy?
That sounds like one of Jesus' parables. The rabbi or the scholar who is in the front of the temple.
Oh yes, I think that I'm not like other men.
Yeah, and I
give
have
a
done
tenth
so much.
of other, yeah. Oh, you're right.
And then the poor man that puts in a penny.
Now, one of Kant's books, Groundwork, opens with this line: "The only thing that is unconditionally good is a good will."
I like that. I like that sentence.
You may not by the end of this.
I know.
Kant's argument for this belief is actually quite plausible. Consider anything you think of in terms of being good, things like health and wealth and beauty and intelligence and so on. For each of these things, you can also likely imagine a situation in which this so-called good thing is not good after all. I mean, this is him firing against utilitarianism. The robust health of a bully, for instance, makes it easier for him to abuse his victims. If you've ever been the victim of a bully, one of the main things about them is that they tend to be bigger and taller, isn't it? And they threaten you by their presence mostly. Yeah. There's something about them. A person's beauty may lead them to become vain and fail to develop in emotional maturity. Even happiness is not good if it's the happiness of a sadist torturing his unwilling victims. So by contrast, goodwill, says Kant, is always good. Goodwill is always good in all circumstances. But what does Kant mean by goodwill? Well, fortunately, the answer is fairly simple. A person acts out of goodwill when they do what they do because they think it is their duty, when they act from a sense of moral obligation.
Now I see what you mean when you say, I might not be pleased with this.
Exactement.
Uh-huh. Because it's kind of like the story of Adam and Eve. You know, everyone's blaming someone else.
That's right. Yeah. Now, saying that people should do their duty from a sense of duty is easy. Anyone can say it. But how are we supposed to know what our sense of duty is? Sometimes we may find ourselves facing moral dilemmas in which it's not obvious which course of action is morally correct. According to Kant, however, in most situations, duty is obvious. If we're uncertain, he says, we can work out the answer by reflecting on what he calls general principles that Kant actually gives a specific name to, categorical imperative. I love it when they just invent these things.
I know.
Yeah.
And on exams, you have to throw that word in every once in a while.
Yeah. It's categorically imperative that you do this. Now,
You put it in the
this,
paper.
he claims, is the fundamental principle of morality. Remember, they're trying to remove God out of the equation, but they need something that is absolutely bedrock. So this categorical imperative is his bedrock morality.
And I think you have to think about the philosophers in terms, they weren't necessarily not believing in God, but they were trying to get a rational way to talk about ethics and morality that wasn't based on a belief in God. So therefore it would become more universal. And but it didn't always work out very well.
No. Now, weirdly enough, if you're trying to create a foundational ethic, you'd think it would just be one grand idea. No, not from Kant, because he offers several different versions of his categorical imperative. One runs as follows: act only on that maxim that you can will as a universal law.
And that to me sounds like Jesus.
What?
Do unto others what you would have.
What?
Okay.
What? It's so cold in here. What this means basically is that we should only ask ourselves, how would it be if everyone acted the same way that I'm acting? Could I sincerely and consistently wish for a world in which everyone behaved in this way? Are you seeing where the problem comes in there?
Yeah.
Because if you're the center of the universe, you may have...
You mean I'm not?
I didn't break it to you gently, did I?
No, you didn't.
So, this is where Kant pushes it. He says, if our action is morally wrong, the answers to the question, what if everyone behaved this way, would also be no. You can't do it. For instance, suppose I'm thinking of breaking a promise. Could I wish for a world in which everyone broke their promises when keeping them was inconvenient? Kant argues that I could not want this, not least because in such a world no one would make promises, since everyone would know that promise meant nothing. Again, do you see the problem with that? It's because it works on my will to what I think should be done. Because you can say that, okay, I want to live in a world where everyone keeps their promises, but some promises are more important than others. It's the Animal Farm thing, you know. All people are equal, but some are more equal than others. Well, all animals are equal, I should say. And so when you're in your situation, you say, well, universally this would apply, but in this particular situation, dun, 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 it ain't gonna. And we have a modern version of that, which is current, don't we?
Situational.
Yeah. And we'll be talking about that soon.
Now, that was a long excursion down a very deep rabbit hole.
That was not a rabbit hole. That was a cave with drawings inside.
Oh,
Old
it sounds
drawings.
like the Republic with little shadows on the wall.
Yes.
But to kind of look back at the philosophical basis for how we think is necessary in order to show us how modern people
Us.
have lost virtue and wisdom is our focal point, along with our ethics of teleos, or the ethics of the end, our view of the ultimate end of good and evil. Much of what we do is situational, an ethic that seeks to promote the most reward we may find available within our current situation. And I had someone, when I was trying to, I really stepped into situational ethics at one point because
What are you going to say you stepped into then?
because and I don't know I don't remember the situation, but I remember the example I gave. Do you always tell the truth? And if you're in court, yes, you tell the truth. But what if Auntie Mame asks you, "Do you like my hat?" Now you know that she wants a compliment about her hat. She doesn't really want the truth about her hat,
Oh, she does. She wants the truth.
but she wants her truth.
Yes.
Yeah. So, what is your response? Do you tell the truth, or do you tell something else? And most people would say, "Oh, Auntie, that is just a beautiful hat, even though it has a flock of about 42 birds of different colors and fruit and vegetables hanging down the side." Yes, that's just wonderful. We began with those Enlightenment philosophies and how that means our focus is too often on ourselves and ourselves alone. Because Auntie Mame wanted me to tell she wanted me to speak her truth.
But you wanted to speak your truth.
I wanted to speak
But you
my
would have
truth.
been battered if you
Yes, a handbag would have come out.
That flock of birds would be be a reenactment of the film.
But we will see, we hear this because it's a very,
It's so powerful.
yeah, and it's a very common problem with modern Christianity, because we hear Jesus died for me. Jesus is my personal Savior and Lord. And that makes Christianity, which is a communal religion, into a religion of individuals. This is all a far cry from orienting one's life toward God and seeing reward as all ultimately a grace gift from God. The scriptures are not at all altruistic. "Well done" is a statement appropriate for a king to say to a servant or a son.
And God does say that. He says it in Matthew later on, chapter 28.
"Well done, my good and faithful servant."
Yes.
All of this is another way of talking about the human flourishing promised now and in the future for the one who will pursue a God-centered, whole person virtue.
Now, Paula says, for many people, spirituality stops just as at the far edge of "Jesus loves me, this I know, for the Bible tells me so." Yes. Yeah, they think they've done enough because I've been told I've been loved and that's all I need to know. But it's that individual ethic which can cause. There's nothing wrong with understanding that God loves me,
Yeah.
even me, and recognizing just how the depth of grace that involves, and that Jesus died even for me, that it wasn't just a certain few people, but I could be included in this for that. But then you've got to move into understanding that Jesus did it for all. And it really does warp how you can live the Christian life if you turn Jesus into being all about you. And believe me, I've met a few people who are like that. It's fascinating to the point that you think you're talking to somebody of a completely different religion. It's that strange. Now, we have to look at all of this together. And the problem with the notion of human flourishing is that it can so easily be perverted, which is what we humans are pretty good at doing. If you think about it, everything we've ever invented is a two-edged sword, isn't it?
Yeah.
A sword, for instance, could be good for chopping trees down, but also be good for killing people. Nuclear power also produces the ultimate weapon. I can't think of anything that doesn't have a dark side to it.
I was years ago teaching a class, a Bible class, and again, a rabbit hole appeared, and I jumped
Were they
into
in
it.
parchments?
Yeah, no, they were on stone tablets.
Oh,
Yeah, we didn't fool around with parchment.
yes.
Let's put it on stone.
As the Diplodocus grazed on the Diplodocus.
But the rabbit hole was something to do about the Feast of the Transfiguration. And I happened to say to the class, the
Were
United
these adults? Or?
Yes,
No.
adults. And I said, I just find it very, very crazy that on the Feast of the Transfiguration, about a feast about the transfiguring light of God, we dropped the first atomic bomb.
Oh, was it?
Yeah. And I didn't anticipate the reaction of the class. There were some people who were just incredibly offended that oh, this stopped. It saved millions of lives by.
So that's an argument for the ends justifies the means.
Yeah.
Yeah. And other people.
Other people, they were able to see the ambiguity of that statement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's a difficult one.
Yeah.
And we see in hindsight now, and so we know a lot of the history is going on around what the people who were involved in making those decisions probably didn't have access to. Yeah, it's an awful thing. So yes, we can pervert things. Now, with that in mind, the hypocrite's problem isn't that he was doing the right thing, because he was doing the right thing, but he was doing the right thing for the wrong reason. Where is the heart when righteous actions are being done? What are you doing? What's your motivation? So it's a bit like actors to their directors. They've got these lines that they know off by heart, but they want to know the motivation behind these lines.
I need the backstory.
Yes. So do I put in a laugh here? Do I end the sentence going up or down? Well, what's my motivation here? Is this serious? Is it funny? Is it And so what's our motivation when we do our actions? Which raises another question: can we ever do anything from a pure motive? Because we're human. I mean, who among us doesn't like praise and flattery? I know I do.
Yeah.
Apparently being praised for doing something that's even good for us. We like that. But for any believer, it should be in them to strive for glory and honor and praise from God himself. It's a difficult one.
Yeah. And then we come to or we look back at week 1 of the study, where we looked at our need to examine who we are, to search deep into the very core of our being. Now, this is not some New Age hoo-ha.
Examine your navel.
Yeah, no.
Get the healing crystals out.
The Japanese proverb, don't try to eat your navel. I don't know why that jumped.
What's that in relation to?
I don't know. It just jumped. You said navel, and it just jumped into my mind. But it's important for us to see what makes us tick, and then we can see what makes us twist our God-directed good actions into human-directed actions that promote human approval.
And this is where the real kind of hypocrisy that Jesus is addressing comes into being. The reason Jesus is using this word and calling these practitioners of piety hypocrites is not because they aren't doing the things that they said they were going to do. They do give alms, they do pray, they do fast, but they are doing it with the wrong heart. Their heart is not in harmony with their actions. Hey, if I do this, it's that guy at the front of the temple. I thank thee, God, that I am not like other men. I give a tenth of all I get, and I do this, I do this.
I fast.
Yes,
I
and the
pray.
guy at the back of the temple is,
I am not worthy.
yeah. There's a difference in heart. The wholeness that Jesus is advocating here, again, is a wholeness that promotes true human flourishing and a Godward direction. That is, I'll tell you, that God is the end. If we get a reward, if God is the treasure that we receive, then that should just add to what we do. In the meantime, as we flourish towards God, then we examine our own motivations for doing things. And sometimes we may not be able to escape our own selves. That we cannot, sometimes we can, and this is me talking from a personal experiences, not just one, that you want to do the best thing. And then the mind in your head, one of the little voices in your head pops in and say, you're doing a real good thing here. You know, they better be happy, or somebody should sort of pat me on the head for doing this. Well, I've just gained my reward, as Jesus tells us. But how do you stop yourself from being like that? I mean, I don't know. How do you become all this humble and pious, and I have no idea.
It's a journey.
Yes, we should be becoming, again, it's that self-awareness that's important, because there are too many people who have never gone through the trouble, or maybe they're not even able to self-examine, to know where the motivations come from, and all the buttons that can be pressed in them, and what satisfies them. And when it comes to say something bad happening in their lives, or just a struggle, something where they struggle, and have to be bad, they don't see it as a chance of growth. They don't see it as a moment that moves them towards God. A lot of people just give up. It may be that they just see this as, oh, it doesn't really matter, and fall off the edge. Or their faith isn't strong enough to understand that this is a growth point, or their image of God is one that, God, this shouldn't be happening to me anyway. You suck. I don't believe in you. And they give up in faith altogether. That's us for this day. If you've got any questions, you've got 2 whole minutes.
Or we could push it a little bit.
3 whole minutes.
3 whole minutes.
No, if you've got any questions, we'd love to sort of answer them now. Observations. Sometimes you have to go through the motions to make yourself open to be lifted up. What is it? Fake it till you make it? Is that the kind of thing? Well, the one thing it shouldn't stop you doing is doing a good thing just because you're not in the right mind to do it. I know there are some actors, until they get into the frame of mind, they can't act.
Yeah.
But some other actors are method actors. They become that character and they live it. So yes, you're right, Bill. Sometimes, well, there's lots of things in life that you have to do. You're a musician. I'm sure there are many times you did not want to pick up a flute. If it could have been the last thing on the planet you could do, you would have gotten away with not doing it. But you did, because you recognize its value.
And as a musician, I know there were times when I did not play very well, but I couldn't just say, okay, I stop. I had to take that point and kind of move it forward. So it's, I think we have to continue to attempt to do good things with the right attitude, and we're going to fail at that.
Father Lewis and myself, we're very different when it comes to, say, helping people on street corners. He's going to be embarrassed here. Let's see if he goes red. Father Lewis has got one of the most generous spirits I've ever come across, a really open heart. And if he can help somebody, it doesn't matter who, he will do. And because I've been sat next to him when he's done that, he's just, the window's gone down and somebody I hadn't even noticed, he's helped them. Me, the cynic comes out in me first. I am the one who thinks, is this guy part of a group that's running a scam here? And a million other things will turn up. Which one is the most Christian? It's pretty obvious, isn't it? It costs me more to be the cynic, I think, in terms of my own spirituality and in not seeing a child of God, a brother or sister in God before me who could be in need. With all the energy I use, sort of concocting scenarios that may or may not apply to that person. Lewis just opens his heart.
I didn't think that up by myself. I read C.S. Lewis, who is not a skilled theologian. I mean, he's not an academic theologian, but he had some really good insights into Christian living. And this was right after World War II.
Mm-hmm.
Someone asked him why he gave money to people, and he said, if someone asks, I give them. You know, if I have it, I will pass it along. And I think I took that to heart when one time someone asked me for something and I was embarrassed by responding, and I kind of turned away. And I think I turned away from Jesus that day.
You mentioned it in a sermon once.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask you for some money, but you don't have a wallet on you, so I'm not going to bother. Be hiding to nothing.
Well, see, like C.S. Lewis, if I had it, I'd give it to you.
So that's the plan. I must make sure I don't have anything. So, with no hypocrisy, I would give it to you if I had it. No, it's really bad, isn't it? And we are in a world that's hurting. I mean, especially this time with people losing their jobs and food banks, and it just goes on and on and on. We're living in a really, really rough time for a heck of a lot of people. And if we can help in any way, I really think we should do. And it should cost us something. That's the thing. That was Mother Teresa of Calcutta.
Yeah.
When some billionaire came up and says, I'm going to give you X $1 million. And she said, is that going to make an impact in your life? And the guy goes, no. She goes, well, I don't want it then. Because if it isn't going to hurt you, then it's not going to do any good. She was actually thinking about the person, not the people who would gain a lot from it, but the soul of the person who is giving it. I mean, wow. I think it's a good point to end on, isn't it?
Insightful woman.
So thank you once again for being with us for this hour. Only 2, maybe 3 rabbit holes. We must try harder.
Yeah, but there's a whole wonderland ahead of us.
Yes, and thank you for your
participation.
Yes, for your comments. As always, stay safe. Keep us in your prayers as you are in ours. Hopefully we'll see you on Sunday. If not, I'll catch you next Tuesday. So until then, God bless and goodbye.
Good night. Good night. Good afternoon.